I've got a diagram up here so you can see. You're going to cut 5 boards. And then what I like to do is I like to number them. So I keep them straight. And then of course, obviously, when you lay them out, you're going to lay them out in the nicest order that the grain looks the best. So I'd number them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then, and I usually cut them about 22 inches long. It could go as much as 23, and about 4.5 inches wide. It could be a little less, a little more. Obviously, the wider you make them, the wider your seat's going to be. Then, on the table saw, and that's all I pretty much do. Once in a while, I'll get my joiner out to clean it up, but I will cut a taper. On board 1, it gets a taper like that. Board 2, it's going to look like that. I think in your diagram I've got a picture. I don't know how clear it is of the board sitting there. You can kind of see the directions they're going. The board 2 gets a taper, and the taper goes the same way. And this taper can be anywhere from 3 to 6. I guess you could go more than that. The higher the number, the more that seat's going to cooper, like this. The lower the number, the flatter the seat will be. And I like 5. That's my magic number, and that's because everything else is 5, so I can remember it. This middle one, you have the angle going basically opposite directions for the middle one. Number 4, same directions as number 2, and number 5 looks just like number 1. It's just a reversed image of it. So there you go. Now here is a sample of that. Exactly that. So if you want to, I've got the dowels in here, so you can actually see that. Can everybody see that? How that's called coopering the seat. You don't have to do this. I do some seats where I don't cooper them, they're just flat. Like if I find a really nice board that I don't want to cut, it's really wide, sometimes I'll just do flat. So, I do think they're a little more comfortable to cooper them because it gets you down in here. Of course, with us old guys and no butts, we don't care either way. But if you got a little booty behind you, you probably want it a little more. So that's the coopering process. Then, as far as, I should talk about this for the joints, as far as something to put it together with. You know, in theory, and I've done several without any mechanical joints like this. In theory, that's a long grain joint. You shouldn't have to. And the chairs that I've done without it are just fine. But it's nice to do these, and you can use a biscuit joiner, you can use the festool if you're really rich, the festool,
Domino.
like the domino, that's very nice. Or you can do like me and use dowels like this. The problem with the dowels is you have to create a little jig on your down thing to get the 5 degree. So that's what this is. It's that little 5 degree taper. So the one that sits in there, it's at a 5 degree. If I did it, it would be at the wrong angle. So that's just it. And you don't have to do this, but it does help in the glue up. Because if you don't do this, then you're going to probably have to do maybe a 2-step or even a 3-step glue up. Glue these 2 together, these 2, then come back and put it together because it's very hard to line them up to get them perfect. The other thing I've been known to do by not using the mechanical fasteners, this one I will lift just a little bit when I glue it together. So do you see what's going to happen? If I lift that when I glue that together, there's a pommel that goes right here. So it gives you the deception that this is a deeper seat because the pommel sticks up higher. By lifting this up about 1/4 inch, you're going to get a little bit of a deceptive look to it. I've done that before, but you can't really do that with the fastener unless you create some other kind of a deal to get that little. While the seat is still in pieces, I take this board and that board, and these are a mirror image of each other, so remember that. So when you're doing it, you have to make sure that you don't get them both going the same direction, or else because there's going to be a 5 degree taper right there. So I will cut this out on the table saw. I'll put this here, put it on my Get your miter gauge, clamp it there, run it through the table saw to 5 degree. And that's gonna give us that slight taper on those chairs, on those back legs. That's what that's for. This one doesn't have to have the taper, so it's just a straight cut. So on the table saw, I cut this out. Then I move to here, and generally, just for your writing purposes, I usually do this. This is totally up to you what you want it to be. I usually do 2.5 in, 3 deep. The further you go in, the closer the legs are going to be. When those legs, the rockers, come back, they're going to be closer together. The further you bring this joint in. So it's all up to you. You know, if you wanted those rockers to almost touch in the back, you could bring this thing way in, and you'd almost have a touch in the back. But I've found that about 3, and the template comes with that dimension in it. You know, I have it just right in there, so I just lay the template on there and mark. And then on the front one, this can vary in depth. Some people will do 1/4 inch. Some people, this one's a 1/2 inch. The deeper you go, the less these legs are going to be pulled into the seat, and you're not going to have that bump out like that. It'll be more just a whoop. So it's personal decision, but I usually do a 1/2 here. And the distance is 2 inches generally. And the only thing will change, if I make this wider, that just means my legs will taper more. So if I made that wider, I would just have a really wide part right here. Taper down. It's only, so that it doesn't matter. It's all personal choice as to how far to make that. Then once I've got those cut out, I usually will clean them up a little bit. I've got a hand rabbiting plane that I'll clean these up with a little bit, but you can do it with it, whatever you want to use it for. Just to make sure this is nice and neat. If your dado blade or even your saw blades, I just nibble these out. I don't even take the time to change out my dado blade because it doesn't take very long to nibble it out. Clean that up so it's nice and straight. And then I go to the router, and I do all this on a router table. And I forgot my bits, so we're using theirs here, so we're not going to be able to pull the plastic off of them. These bits were created for the back leg Maloof joint. They have a taper, they have what they call a positive and a negative bit, and then they have a straight bit. And one of the one that runs on the top of the thing is called the positive, I believe. So if you look here, when you route these, you change bits several times. But this bit has a taper on the bearing and a taper here, and it's a 5 degree taper, just like the taper you cut on your table saw. So when I route that, you can see it gives me that. Can everybody see that?
That's the bottom, right?
That is the bottom of the seat, so that would be considered the negative. They call that the negative. Doesn't matter. You just have to line it up so that it follows that angle. And then the top one, which is considered the positive, is going to fit right there. And you run both of these bits until you touch. So you run it all the way in, stop. You run it all the way in, stop. And I also make a bit that is just like this, except for it's a straight rabbiting bit. So with the straight bit, this joint is created with the straight bit, the front leg, because everything's just going straight up and down on those chairs. And the back legs, you're going to use the straight bit going in and in here. And on both the other side too, and in here. And we don't really, we end up getting a little tear out like here and here, because as you run that bit around, it'll tear that out. So if you don't like that tear out, it doesn't matter because you're going to carve that away. But if you don't like it, put a little block there. So when you come off the router, it's got a block to support the wood. You don't get the tear out. But I don't ever worry about it because I'm going to just whittle that away. So, and once again, you do the same distance from here to here, and it doesn't matter what this is, because you're going to create your legs to fit that Everyone's unique. I don't, I usually do about a 3/4 to an inch thick on that. But I don't worry about it. I just twist my bit up until I get to a certain point. The trick is this has to be the same as this. When we push our bits in to here, on the upper one, so if you push that bit in and go all the way to this end with the bearing, you'll end up with a little divot right there. Because it's going in too far because this taper is coming up. So the trick here is to come in and you just don't quite touch the edge with that bearing. So you got to be down there real close and watch. Just come in just enough, stop, pull back. Yeah, a lot of people, rather than using the bits, and if you look at this chair when we're done here, you're welcome to come look. That one has a wedge, a 5-degree tapered wedge glued onto the leg itself. And then with that one, you don't have to do this here. This just becomes a straight deal, and then you put the taper onto your leg rather than the seat. And so a lot of people do that, and I think a lot of that is just because then you don't have to spend $100 for the bit sets. What is it? $100 and something, I think.
Yeah, each one
for the whole set. Yeah, it might be like $150 for the whole set. I think. Yeah, the dowels.
Yeah.
You can see where they're at there. I get down to the bottom when if you're going to put any mechanical fasteners type deal, make sure you're down towards the bottom of the seat. Because if you're up in here, when you get carving, you end up coming right into your deal. So just be aware that they got to be down low. I'm up about a 1/4 inch from the bottom of the seat there. Yeah, and then of course you want to put a couple facing the other direction to pull the bottom in. But you can see that coopered effect that the seat gets because of that. And then what I like to do, and this is not necessary this here, but the reason I do this is because when you're scooping this seat out, creating that scoop seat, there's a lot of material. And so by going on the bandsaw and cutting this little bit out, I get rid of some of that material. I don't have to do as much just removing the bulk of it. It's more getting the edges. And you can see I'll lay my template on. It'll come around, and then of course I'll start with this and scoop that seat out. Let's do front legs. Now, I'm going to pull this apart so that I can pass these joints around so you can see. So on the front legs, I start out, when I create that joint, I start out, these are perfectly square. I think on there, talk about it being square. Let's measure it for you. And I try to make these a little long so I can cut them off if I need to. So I'm going to create, that's going to be about a 22-inch long leg. And then from the middle of the seat, the top is about 8 inches, roughly. This is all varied to, what you want as far as your height. And then from the middle of the seat to the bottom is roughly 13 inches, okay? So with it being perfectly square, I will just lay that on the table saw and I will nibble out this. I don't get a dado. If you want to get a dado bit out, fine. You nibble it out on 3 sides. This side, this side, this side. And make it so that the depth, everything matches your joint you created. Now the tricky part of this is, once you're done nibbling that out, you have to round this over so that it will fit into where that rabbiting bit rounded over. So you have to make sure that the round over bit matches the diameter of this. So in this case, this rabbiting bit is 1 inch around. So half of that is the radius of this. So I have to have a 1 inch or a ½ inch round over to match the 1 inch here. If by chance you were using an 1.5 inch diameter, I should say, bit, then you would have to get a 3/4 inch round over. So they have to match. And just so you're aware, all the router bits are not created equal. So it's nice to stay, if you're going to buy a white sides, get a white sides round over. because if you try switching branches, sometimes these won't quite give you a good job. That chair. You can see how that fits. After I've got this created, I will turn it on the lathe, leaving just this portion. So it looks like that when it comes off the lathe. Now this, everybody notice that taper on the top there? If you happen to have some thick material, remember I was talking about getting like 12-quarter material, then this really isn't necessary. But if you're just using 8-quarter, this is really nice, because when the arm hits here, if you don't have this taper, you have to cut that taper into the arm. So what happens is, if I had this arm here that fits right there, that's how it's going to fit on there. Well, it has to have a taper, so I would have to cut the taper into this arm, which makes it so you don't have as much material to get you around. So if you can get thicker material for this, then you can just cut this off straight, and then you cut your angle right here. But because I can't ever get it, I cut it in this. So I cut, this is generally a 10 degree. It can be different, it can vary depending on how you want that arm to slope. But I usually 10 is a good number. And so when do you think you'd want to cut that? Now? That'd be easy to cut?
Square, baby.
Perfectly square. So before I turn it, I cut that. The other thing I like to do is I like to drill holes. I don't have one in that one, but I got one in there. So a 1/2 inch hole on either end. And that's to accept the dowel that is here and for the rockers. Real quickly, put these legs on. And as you can see, this is one of those deals that you probably don't need screws. A lot of people put one screw. I don't know, I just do 2. And I leave a 3/8 inch, there'll be a 3/8 inch plug that'll go in there. And this is where I was talking about the screws, where you're constantly pulling these on and off, because as you're shaping this, you're trying to get that to blend in. You have to put it on, and I don't like to glue it till I've got her pretty good, because once it's glued on, it's a lot harder. Like that chair, I still got to sand that thing. It's going to be a nightmare. I built that like 5 years ago, and that's why I haven't finished it, because I put it together way too soon. But yeah, and that's where using a little smaller screw here for your ons and offs, and then the final one where you put your glue in, using just the size up screw will make it so. A lot of tricks. I don't know all of them, but. So, front legs, they are done. Now with our back legs, once again, there's a right and a left on the back legs. Now on this particular joint, and a lot of people will create a jig so that they can make this joint on the table saw. So they'll make a joint so that they now have a flat edge, and they can run it through the table saw like this. But what I do is just cut that by hand. So I lay it up to my joint, I take my chisels, and I chisel this out. And I always start with the biggest part right here. Cut that one first.
Just chisel that out?
I do, just chisel it out. And then once I have this one created, then because of that 5-degree taper that we created on that back thing, we have to make that a 5-degree taper. So you lay your protractor or on there, set it at 5 degrees, draw your lines, and then I cut that one out. And the same thing here, then you take it to the router table, or I don't know, I always use the table just because I got more surface, and route out that to match the routing bits. And once again, make sure right and left on these. They got to be mirror images of each other. There you go. They call that legging it up. Now, you'll notice on the back legs, I go on the bandsaw and I cut this out to get this shape. Whereas that one I have not done that yet, just to show you what I do with the bandsaw to get a little bit more of it taken down, trim the size. And I also do it down here, if you'll notice. And that way I get that start for that curve down into the seat. Right there, I get the start for the curve coming into the arms. And I do that all on the bandsaw. And I don't even use a template there. I just take my pencil, hold it in my finger, and go about, what is that, a ½ inch maybe? 3/8 of an inch. Cut both those out. Now on the arms, I start out there with a block of wood. I'll give you what my dimensions are on this piece of wood. I want it to be a nice rectangle. That's 19 3/4, 20 inches, by, a little over 5. So with my piece, it's perfectly square. I come in, and if, I'll have it a little longer than what I have now, but I will come in here and I will try to put a clamp right here. It's nice and tight, and then I will draw a line right down for that angle. And then I'll take that, cut that angle, and sometimes you have to nibble up to it a little bit, so I'll leave a little room just
Cut
to...
that on a miter box?
I cut it on a miter saw. So if you have a pretty accurate miter saw, it's all right. If not, do it on a table saw. Mine seems to be pretty accurate, but you can see, just draw that line, make sure this is tight. Then you come in, put a dowel pin in here, lay this in, smack the dowel pin, and then I always draw an angle here because this is going to be a 10-degree angle. So if I take this to my drill press and I drill a hole straight down, then it's not going to fit. So I have to put it on the drill press, put a little 10-degree taper underneath it so that I'm going in at a 10-degree. So once I get that in there, that down, then I will drill a hole from the back, you can see here, always leaving a 3/8 inch, place for a 3/8 inch plug.
You've cut it to shape before this.
So anyhow, I get it on there, I get the screw on there just like that. There's the board. So then, once I've got that there, then I go to the bandsaw, and I've got 2 templates. I got a template that goes this way for the top. And then when I've got this shape cut, then I have a template that lays on here that gets kind of starting that shape. And I cut those out on the bandsaw, as you can see. And then most of the rest of this, I will come in like this, because I can come in and nibble away at this and create the shape that eventually, puts it here. And that's all personal choice. Taper this down a little bit, whatever you want to do. But this, eventually that's what it comes out to be. But at this point, I'm done with the bandsaw. Now it's time to start shaping. I've got my hole drilled in it. And so then when I'm ready, once I've got this shaped nicely and almost to the point where, then I will put it on, glue it, glue this side, put my dowel in, more dowel here. Longer one, this will work like that, and then drive my screw in, and then at that point, and then once again, like I was saying, a lot of times I'll take it off because now I've got to blend this all in. So sometimes I'll have to pull this off while I'm shaping, get it all blended in. It's just all personal preference, what you like. You can get in here with this attached and get some of this stuff. This all gets shaped and blended in. Down here is going to get shaped, blended in. Okay? So, like I said, here's that 10-degree taper we were talking about. That can be adjusted with your template a little bit. If you think you want your arm to go up a little higher, move your template up just a little bit, create this part a little higher. If you need it down a little bit, so you want your arm a little flatter, you drop it just a little bit, and then you adjust that angle accordingly. If I had a nice thick piece of this could be flat. I would cut the angle out of this. But this works really well right here. It gives me enough beef to do the trick. Okay. So headrest. This is another place where if you could get some 10-quarter, 12-quarter material, it's very nice. Because to get that kind of a curve out of it, you can't get that out of a 12-quarter piece of material. You know, the distance from here to here is more than 2 inches. So if I can get a thicker piece, it's nice. But if I can't, then what I do, and this isn't a very good glue job, which is good because now you can see this. Because this, like on this chair, you can't see that glue joint, but it's there. So what I do, first thing I do is I get a nice square piece. I'll give you dimensions if you want to write them. Not that it matters because at this point, I'm measuring off the chair. I'm not going off the template. It is roughly 21 or so. And see, this distance will change depending on where you put these back legs. The tighter you bring them together, the closer together this will be. The further you notch it out, the farther apart that will be. So I've got my board, it's all milled down, it's flat, perfectly flat. We know this is going to be roughly a 5-degree cut because that's a 5-degree taper coming out of there. So that angle up there will be 5 degrees. So it's not always 5 degrees. That's why I just
Put it up from the back and scribe it down.
exactly. So I would take my piece, scribe, make try to get it level up here when I scribe it, because if I don't get it level, now the angles are off. And then I will leave it a little long the first couple of times because sometimes you have to adjust your angle maybe to 4.5 rather than 5. For some reason, you didn't get super tight, but it doesn't matter because as long as you get this tight, then once I get that angle cut, then I just keep nibbling away until I drop that down to roughly right there. And this will act, if you notice, watch what happens when I go up there. These things will push out on you a little bit sometimes, so you have to be careful that you're not pushing them too far out when you're putting this in and measuring. But right there. So once I've got these two ends cut, now I'm going to create my back. I take a template and I put it on the front of this here, and on the band. This is where a bandsaw is necessary. You'd never get this with a jigsaw ever. Well, maybe you could, I don't know. But on a bandsaw, you can cut this out. Then, this piece that I cut off, I'm going to take and I'm going to glue it on the back. So do you see how I did that? This is the piece that used to be here. I took it, I've got a flat surface from the front, I've got a flat surface on the back of that board, and I glue them together. It's nice, and this, the reason I put this is so you can see, it's nice not to have any sapwood. It's too easy to see the joint when you got two pieces of sapwood coming there. But with this piece, if you notice the sapwood, I will end up getting rid of that. You know, that'll all get rounded over. So it shouldn't bother me. But if I had sapwood clear down to here, it would be a problem because you'd see that. And I do have a couple of chairs that I, did, and they still look okay. It's not something to worry about, but if you're looking to really hide that joint, that's what you do. So once I've got that, I glue it up. Then I take my template and put it on the back, and I cut this back shape. So now I have the angle, the 5 degrees cut, it fits in there. Got this cut. Then I have to drill before I start cutting any shapes on this. I need to drill out all of my holes for the spindles to go into. So, basically what I do is I come in here and measure across here, cut it in half. I'm going to have 7 spindles, so that's 8 spaces. So divide the distance here by 8. Whatever that is, then I put that on there, put it in there, mark. Now they're all evenly spaced. Sometimes I'll leave a little closer gap, because if you notice here, and it really doesn't matter, but if you notice, because the chair goes in a little further, if I evenly space these, then I'm going to have a little wider space here. right there that I'm gonna have between them, so I try to adjust that, but it doesn't matter. Stand-up Slater, that chair, they're running straight up and down, you notice that? Instead of the spindles kind of being angled a little bit, so I copied down below up here rather than spacing this, where on this chair, they're evenly spaced here and evenly there. That one, they got enough down. It's all a preference. If you like that look, then just copy what's below. So once this is done, and this is something a lot of people, and the first time I did a chair, I bought the plans from Charles Brock. He never showed, or I missed them. But he just took and put this in there, screwed it in, and then you shape it, get it all done, and when you're all done, you unscrew it, put your spindles in. Well, that didn't work very good. The reason it didn't work very good, where are my spindles? Unless your spindles, if you notice here, this spindle is not designed for these legs. This is a mistake, but anyhow, it's a different pattern. So if I was to put that spindle in there, and I had already mounted that seat, you see what's going to happen? I can't twist it enough because that spindle isn't twisted up enough. It's not, and that's what happened to me. When I got all done, I had everything I thought was beautifully done. I went and put those spindles in, and I was just slightly off up here like this. So I learned that what I want to do before I put the screws in here, I'll get the spindle that matches this one much better. This one has a little bit different shape, so it matches way better. And then once again on these spindles, this right here is where your back, the small of your back fits right in that spot. So a lot of times you think, well, I should be there, but no, this is that lumbar support on these spindles. So if I'm doing that, I gotta turn it like that. So what I always do is I always get one spindle like this, and I get these things drilled out so that it'll fit up in here. And before I mount this up here, I get one spindle. I make sure that when I screw this in, that spindle will be in there while I screw it in. That way when I pull it out, I'm gonna get this in here and attached. Then I will remove it, and I will remove this spindle because it'll be easier to sand. When those spindles go back in, I don't have to play around with this. Is all just goes right back in perfect. All this work that I did, I don't have to redo. That makes sense to you? Okay. So I usually put 3. Sometimes I only do 2. That's got 2. It's just preference, you know. But I usually do 3. 1, 2, 3 screws. You make sure when you put them in that you angle them just a little bit back so that you're, screwing in. I usually try and use fairly long screws there. This is the only thing that holds that in place, glue. And then when that's done, I pull the spindle off. And I will mount that back in those holes that I just drilled. And now, basically from that point, because it's really hard to do this headrest without having it there, because you have to blend it right into here. So then I will actually carve this out. It's quite easy to do with it attached. Okay? Now on the spindles, just quickly, there's a template that comes along with them, but there's the start of the thing. This is the one spot I think I put in there that you could use 6/4 material. You don't have to have 2 material. Because these spindles come out to be about 1 3/8 to 1 inch thick when you're done. The actual getting to this stage is probably the shortest. This takes the least amount of time. It's once you get to this stage and you're starting the carving and the sanding, because you basically just carve this chair.
And the finish.
Just to give you an idea, you can see there, I've cut these out with a template. Then I have this, I think I brought it here. Got another template, creates the, that I draw on there, cut it out on the bandsaw. And then go from this point and start shaping it. Now the reason I've gotten faster is because a lot of times now I'll take a little handheld router with a little 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch round over bit, and I can get a lot of that bulk off there real quick. Then I'll take it on there and get my spoke shave and my sanding stuff. You know, but it can be a little tricky. The first few times I tried that, it was splitting wood out, and, ruining some. So and that's the other thing, I always make a couple extra of these. Inevitably I break them somewhere along the way. The final thing, and this is basically you've got the chair done. You've got it shaped. It's ready for finish before you put your rockers. But here's the rockers prior to the bending. And what I do is I just go on the table saw and I try to get my saw set up pretty accurately. And then I will cut about 1/8 inch thick, and I try to bring them off of the table in the order I cut them. So if I take about a 5-inch wide board that's about 52 inches long, I can usually get 2 rockers out of that. I try to use as thin of a blade as I can get, so I'm not getting too much waste in between cuts. And you just peel them off, and you'll see I got them numbered. There's 7. And this actually gets an 8th piece, which is a piece of ebony. So if I wasn't putting the ebony in, I would do 8 pieces. But basically what you know, this distance isn't critical. You want it to be about 1 1/8 to 1 1/4 when you're done bending it. So if you want to make these a little thicker and you figure you can bend them around that jig, you know, at 1/4 inch, you give it a shot. You know, some woods you could do it, others, yeah, others not so much. But I usually try to do just about an 8, maybe slightly over. And then I cut my ebony, and I will put that in, and it doesn't matter, I'll even put it, you know, on each side, just make sure they're both the same, whether it's the 3rd piece up, 4th piece up, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, he does.
So once I've got this cut, then I put glue on every piece, and I have a jig that I've created out of plywood with some clamping holes. And I put up this. I've got some pieces. This tape, I think my pieces were about 18 inches long. But that's the ebony. That's not necessary. It's just something that people add. It's rather spendy.
It's for the core, not for specific.
It's not for anything to make the chair stronger. It's just for decoration.
Okay.
And it's an expensive decoration. That little piece of ebony is about $30. It goes through there. So maybe even more than that. Just depends on how good you are with your ebony. But it's something that Sam Maloof did on almost all his chairs. And he would use ebony plugs in all the plugs, so you have a black ebony plug. So if you're trying to mimic kind of his thing, that's certainly not necessary. And so once I've got this band comes out of the jig, you can see, I actually had one in the jig glued, and I was going to grab it, and I forgot to pull it out, so you can see how rough it is. But there's glue all over it. So I end up having to run that on the joiner, run it through the planer a little bit, clean it up first so it doesn't kill your blades. And then what I will do is I will get the 2 together, because sometimes when they come out of the jig, they're not the same. For some reason, they have a little spring to them. So I will double tape them together, and then I will take them on a spindle sander and make them the same. If they're just off just slightly, so that they're perfect, because you want that thing to rock. If it is off a little bit, you're going to rock sideways. So you want it, so I create 2 identical ones by putting them together. Then I do what they call the transition block. We have to have a transition between the bottom of this and here. So while I'm cutting this, I will cut, and I cut 8 of those. And if I'm going to put, and a lot of times I will put a piece of ebony in these also. This 8 inches will do this one and the back one. So I'll cut that in half, and then I will just glue those on. They don't need a jig because it will just follow this pattern here. And then when I have that done, now my rockers are ready to be fitted onto the chair. So let's pretend I have transition blocks on here. I will just, so what I will do, and I generally do this on my table saw, and I get both rockers underneath there on my table saw. Okay. My transition box will be here. And then what I do, and I have a little formula that I use that I found works pretty well, is I take the distance from here to the middle of the seat. So that's 14. And then I take the distance from here on an angle to the middle there. And I try to make it so this is 80% less shorter than this. So if we look at this one, let's see how I did. And I'm not 100% perfect on this, I just get it close. So the middle of the seat there is about 12 and a half. The middle of the deal there is about 10 and a half. Who's got a calculator? How close is that to 8? If we take and divide those two out, it's close, I'll just tell you that. If I take the 10 and a half and the 12 and a half and divide it, it'll come out to about 0.8, 82 or something like that. But
So
that,
you add those up and take the average.
yeah, I make sure the back one is about 80% shorter
Oh.
than the front one. And that gives you that nice kickback on there. Then, and so, I will scribe, the line and cut it off, and I just lay the chair down, take a handsaw, cut it off. Then I'll get it on the table saw with my transition box, and I will take and scribe it. If anybody's familiar with scribing, you basically take this and scribe around those transition blocks so that it's going to match up with the transition box. So I will scribe around it, then I will just cut it with a handsaw. And I do that all the way around. I try to get it the same. The other thing you can do to make sure your rockers are the same level, basically back here, is you can take a measurement from, say, the back of the seat to a point on the rocker. And sometimes I'll cut these off depending on the length. Like my sister, I was building one for her, and she was complaining that these rockers go back too far. So I made her a little shorter. But I get a point here. So that's like 22 inches. I would measure across there about 22 inches. And then from here up to that point, make sure they're the same on both of them. If they're not, then you might have to kick one forward or one back a little bit just to make sure they're rocking perfect. So once I have this scribed, it's not perfect. It doesn't fit tight there. So what I do, and there's different ways to do this that I've seen, but I will flip the chair upside down. If I can do this, I don't know if I can do this one upside down without it falling apart on me. So to get a very, very tight and exact fit on the rockers, what I will do is with my transition blocks, I've got them here, I will lay them on top. And my holes I've already drilled. So I've got holes drilled to go in here and here. And I will take one of my dowels out, and I'll leave one in here. Set it in there. And I take a clamp and just lightly put it right here. And then I take like an old piece of belt sanding paper, and I lay it right in between here. And then I pull it through. Bring it. Eventually, after enough pulls, that thing seats right to so it's perfect. So your scribe line doesn't have to be perfect when you start out, it just seats it right to and then once I have this one done, I put the dowel in here. Now take the dowel out of here, pull it through, and go all four legs until I've got them seated just perfect on there. So they just sit right. And you're not adjusting enough that you're throwing the rockers off, but you're adjusting enough that you can. I basically take a feeler gauge and I'll feel, when I can't get the feeler gauge, a real thin one through, I've got it there. And then it's time to glue those on. And that's another place where the epoxies, I use that because sometimes the same thing happens here. When you're drilling these dowels down in, your angle, you're not perfect. So then to compensate for that, you make your dowel a little smaller and then just epoxy it. Rather than have to have this angle perfect, I can just do it by eyeball. If it's not perfect, and I downsize the dowel. And I usually make my dowels out of whatever species I'm doing here, because I've got that nice downmaker, so it just makes it easy to do that.
One thing my uncle.
You know, and then once I got that done, and this is seated perfectly, then I pull this off, shape it, put whatever, you know, decoration you want on it. And then the final thing is I will put this on, and then I blend in these seats, or these transition blocks. Of course, the trick is, I guess, to see how long it can rock, just by pulling it back and letting it go. See how long you can get that thing to rock, you know. And there, you know, if you got it off just a little bit, and you got it to this point, and you decided the rockers were, you could go underneath with a spoke shave and just clean it up under there. To, you know, if for some reason you just got off. But so far, I've never gotten off with the weight. And that method where you measure back and then measure up, and I usually use my table saw because that's about the flattest thing that I have in my shop is the table. You know, I don't have a nice flat bench. Mine's just full of glue and stuff. But my table saw I try to keep pretty flat, and so I use it as my flat surface, and I'll measure across, put a point, and then measure up, and then try and make it so those just slide. And you can eyeball them too a little bit. You know, I'm pretty good at it. Not my eyeballs. You know, it just depends. The finish, you know, obviously everything gets sanded, you know, and I usually sand it to about, you know, 320. I don't know, I hear people go clear to like 2,000, but it's like, can you really see that? I don't think, my eyes can't, so 320 is probably pretty good. But then I'll run one edge on the joiner, get it flat, and then I'll run it through in the planer on the other edge to make it nice and flat. And then I will take the two, double take them together, go on my spindle sander and just make sure they're perfect. Because they're not always equal. For some reason, you'd think they'd be equal. They're coming out of the exact same jig that you glue it to, but no. And then while I have it together, I will cut this end off a little bit, cut this end off a little bit, so they're the exact same pieces. And I do that with most of my parts that are mirror images of each other. When I'm sanding them, I'll double stick them together while I'm, you know, cleaning them up on the spindle sander. That way when I'm done, I pull them apart, I've got exact copies. So. All right, if that's no more questions, you're welcome to take any pictures you want of the chairs. You're welcome to sit in them if you want to sit in them.
I can't fit in the blue one for some.
I already did in that one.
Yeah. Does that one, you can't fit in this one? You can fit in
I can't fit in the
I'll
little
go down
one.
at that little one.
Hey, thanks a lot, Chad.
Yes,
That was really
hey,
good.
thanks for
Thank
filming.
you.
I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Jeff.